we have spent U.S. taxpayers and allies $1.5 trillion will be spent on that program. Now, to give you a sense for how big $1.5 trillion, that's more than Russia's GDP on a single-seat airplane.
The Way of Will John.
Guys, what's going on? We have Dr. Sean Mcfate. It's always fun to say doctor, even though I assume you don't run around having people call you doctor. Depends. How you doing, man? What's going on?
I'm doing great. You can call me Sean. Well, that's great.
Okay.
In the Pentagon, they call me doctor, but
here
we call me Sean. Yeah,
that's cool, though. Yeah, I don't know if I could get used to it, even if I was a doctor. My father's a doctor as well, and it's always fun to mess with him formally, call him Dr. Dad or something like that. But so, okay, guys, listen. Sean is an incredibly well educated and researched human being and individual who's done quite a bit. I'm going to leave the introduction to you, just to let people know who you are and why you're here.
Well, I'm from the United States. I was born I grew up in Connecticut and New York City, and I originally wanted to be a violinist. And I went to a New York City boarding school that was a feeder for Juilliard, and my dream was to play Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto at Carnegie Hall at age 17. And I had my first midlife crisis at age 13 when I realized that no matter how much I practiced, I would never be a great violinist. And so I gave the whole thing up, went to college, and then became a paratrooper in the U.S. Army, in the 82nd Airborne Division. And people sometimes ask me, how could you go from being a violinist to being a paratrooper? But actually, it wasn't hard, because the discipline needed for any sort of peak performance thing, whether it's an instrument like the violin or playing a sport or anything else, translates very easily into an elite military unit. I spent several years as a paratrooper. I left the Army and then became a private military contractor. Some would say mercenary. I wouldn't, but it's come up. And I worked globally, mostly in Africa. And then I had another sort of midlife crisis when I looked up and realized that there was no old people in my profession. And it made me sort of rethink some of my life choices. So I came back to Washington, D.C., got a few degrees, worked in a few think tanks, and now I'm a professor of war and strategy at the U.S. National Defense University, which is the premier war college for the U.S. military, Georgetown University, Syracuse University, and also at a think tank called the Atlantic Council, where I'm a senior fellow. And I specialize on strategy, war, and international relations.
Yeah, so absolutely fascinating. I mean, and well transversed as you are. It's a subject that I think is missed by a lot. I don't remember having a good understanding of strategy in my high school was no joke by any means. And in school, I mean, it's something that is applicable to life as it is to, obviously, to war and politics. And these are the things that allow people to understand what to do, why to do. And you've been somewhat critical in the past of the United States for having, as you put it, strategic atrophy, in the sense that we possibly aren't flexing that muscle in the correct way. Could you maybe just expand a little bit on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, what's going on in Kabul right now as the U.S. exit Afghanistan is a great example of what I call strategic atrophy. And I mean, look, the U.S. military is now infamous for winning every battle but losing the war, whether it's Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan. And the U.S. has the best military in the world. And if we're honest with ourselves, I mean, let me ask you, Will, what do you think is the last big war the U.S. won? I could put you on the
spot. It's got to be World War II.
Yeah, it's 1945.
Yeah.
If we are honest with ourselves, the United States, we have the best military in the world. We haven't won in 70 years. So what's the problem? What's the problem? And this question vexes me a lot because I have lost good friends in Iraq and Afghanistan, and seeing trillions of dollars spent there and nothing to show for it. And, as a vet, it's hurtful to see American image tarnished by low-level foes. So that's why I wrote this book, The New Rules of War, about what the problem is. And the problem is that we have the best military on the ground, but at the strategic level of war, we have a low strategic IQ. And that is not just general officers. It's like the national security establishment in Washington, D.C. So it's all the people who wear suits and the politicos and the members of Congress. It's that class that they, in my opinion, are just terrible. The troops on the ground, the people on the ground are fantastic. The problem is senior management. And they don't have a strategic knowledge because we don't teach that in universities anymore.
So was there a time that was, because, I mean, as someone who likes to study history myself, I mean, I don't know whether or not this is myth or not, but was it true that possibly not ancient China, but in the Chinese past, they wouldn't even teach strategy to their, I guess, subordinates, that it was considered too much of a gift to understand. So was there a time then, you're saying, that we as a nation in the United States were teaching strategy or using it more? Or when did we and why did we become so rusty? What happened? Was the World War II win so great that we just figured that we'll never need any,
I think that's part of it. I mean, it's a great question, Will. I mean, we can talk about ancient China later, but in the United States context, look, I think we're more lucky than smart, if we're honest. We're more lucky than smart. So people like Abraham Lincoln was a great strategic thinker during the U.S. Civil War, but his generals were not. And unlike our presidents today, he had real backbone. He's kept on firing them until he found Ulysses Grant, who was his general. After 1945, I think we won not because of great strategy. We won because we had great resources. The Soviet Union and the United States had deep resources. And the Germany and others and Japan we just whittled them down through attrition. We did have some really good strategists like General George Marshall of the U.S. Army, but Patton was not a strategist. He was an operational tactician. So he was good at winning battles, but Eisenhower was good at winning wars. But after 1945, I think there was a certain deal of hubris, of arrogance in the United States. Like, hey, we're the top dog. We don't have to change the way we fight. Everybody's got to adapt to us. And then when when the Soviet Union collapsed, we had this, end of history moment where like everybody's going to look like America. We're USA. And 30 painful years later, here we are. And it shows that we just don't think about strategy. We assume that because we have, better jet fighters and better soldiers, we can win wars. Meanwhile, our enemies have no jet fighters and have really bad soldiers, yet they're winning war. And we are failing to learn right now. And that's the real problem. Kabul is just the hood ornament of a bigger problem. And that we observe lessons, but we don't seem to learn them. And that's because we have a strategic IQ problem, and that's where we have to focus on.
So I'm so curious, and I'm so happy that we're having this conversation here, because there was something that struck me in all of the things that you have said that I've been struggling with understanding, and that I'm hoping you have an answer for, which is considering that I understand exactly what you're saying when it appears that all we're doing is expecting that when the next conflict comes, we're spending trillions of dollars in our, on our military and expecting that when World War III happens, we will overpower whoever it is, or even if it's in space or whoever it is, we're going to overpower them with our might. At the same time, what you've stated is, and what's clear to everyone, is that Russia and China are employing these sort of tactics where they don't necessarily need to fight us outright, because it just wouldn't make any sense for them, for us, for the rest of the world. And so they employ these tactics where they, like in Crimea, which I've been to before when it was part of Ukraine, and where where Russia used, correct me if I'm wrong, no, mercenaries, correct, to
That's right.
be there and basically annex that part of the country. So my question to you is: it's very clear that China and Russia understand this. It's clear that, say, a country like Vietnam understood that they weren't going to overpower us, that they needed guerrilla warfare was going to be their tactic in order to win the war. And so, but it seems to me that you're saying that the American government isn't, or at large, isn't putting enough effort into these subtle new war tactics or new war strategies. But to me, it seems like when I look at things that have been done, like I read a great book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman,
Right.
And it seems like we're doing that in Central America, and we're doing that in Africa sometimes, and are we not employing it? And I want to throw a quote that you said in one of your talks, which was, "We may already be at war with Russia and China, and the strategy may be to make us think that we're not at war." I really begs the question: are we really not thinking about that, and or is this just a veil where people are just using the money, and that money's going to people, and it's fine because in the black budget we're doing great, we're crushing China, maybe even, that's my real question.
Oh, okay. So, we're not crushing China, and we're not crushing Russia, but we do have a lot of money going to black budgets. It's just not. It's more heat than light in what it's producing. The U.S. government, as you know, I mean, here's some factoids for the U.S. The U.S. spends more on its military than the next 10 biggest militaries in the world combined, including Russia, including China, including Germany, UK, others, Brazil. And also, over half of the U.S. federal discretionary budget goes to our military. The rest of the interagency, Department of Agriculture, Department of State, they get the scraps. So we clearly have a military mentality, a really military focus. And that is part of the problem. Our adversaries, Russia and China, they are smart. They have adapted to the new ways of warfare. And they know that cunning can win over brute force. But we're still stuck in the brute force paradigm. You've heard this adage that generals always like to fight the last war, especially if they won it. That's what's going on in the United States of America. And our last war that we won was World War II, where brute force and attrition warfare basically won. And so we're investing in things that give us battlefield victory, like, F-35 fighter jets and Ford-class carriers, which cost a lot of money. And I argue those things are already obsolete. The last time there was a strategic dogfight was the Korean War. So why do we need more fighter jets, especially if they have zero combat missions? We've been at war for 20 years. The F-35 has zero combat missions. And just to let you know how much money we're spending on the F-35 is like the single-seat jet fighter. We have spent, U.S. taxpayers and allies, $1.5 trillion will be spent on that program. Now, to give you a sense for how big $1.5 trillion, that's more than Russia's GDP on a single-seat airplane. And it is, and if it was a nation state, it'd be ranked 11th in the world ahead of Saudi Arabia. It has zero combat missions, 20 years of war someplace in the United States, and we're buying a lot more of these things. These things are already obsolete for war in the 21st century. So the U.S. we're still fighting the 20th century's wars. Our warfare has changed in the 21st century. Russia, China, Iran, terrorists, international organizations, they all know, criminal organizations, they all know that. And that's why the U.S. struggles. Despite having the best military in the world, it struggles against the Taliban, ISIS, Russia, China, because it is like lapped. It's locked in last century's warfare. Our adversaries have lapped us a few times over now. And all we're doing after coming back from Afghanistan is we're going to repeat our same old habits and mistakes. And that's why, and China and Russia, the first rule of strategy is if your enemy is making a mistake, you get out of their way. You let them continue to make that mistake. And that's what they're doing. They're fighting modern warfare. We're fighting we think the future of war is World War II with better technology. And that's the problem.
I see. Okay. Well, so then, in a sense, we lack the understanding that these almost infinite resources that we seem to have need to be directed elsewhere. And then that takes us on to something that I've heard you touch on as well, which is that we are in this information technology in this world. And I mean, it would be strange to say, because I know you have you've spent your time letting people know, at least, that a lot of things happen in the private world, in corporations now. That's what's a lot of people, and I think the general public has to wake up to, right, is that there were mercenaries in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and we don't talk about that on the news. We just think USA, you know. So are you saying essentially that we just need to divert our attention and our resources to information, or?
Well, you're right that victory now is not won on battlefields like Berlin in 45 or Stalingrad or Midway. Victory is won in the information space, right? I mean, look at Russia is a disinformation superpower, and they try to swing close elections all the time, whether it's the Brexit or EU elections or US elections. We don't know if they're successful, but we know that they're trying, and maybe they are successful. And the strategic logic is this. It's like, who cares about the sword if you can manipulate the mind that wields it? If you can get elected a head of state who's sympathetic to Russia rather than a hardliner, that's a strategic win. And they're not doing this through war, bombs and bullets. They're doing it through disinformation, through tweets and bots and disinformation. Deep fakes is now a big thing, which are easy to do. And so this is where modern warfare is trending. One of my rules in the new rules of war is that some of the best weapons do not fire bullets. And we're getting to a place now where cunning beats brute force. And it's changing warfare, going from it's changing warfare, which we can discuss, but cunning beats brute force. And that's what Russia and China and others are investing in. And the United States and the West, like the United Kingdom just bought a huge aircraft carrier, are investing in brute force. And that's the problem.
I still have to, I will still push back on this one more time just to get an understanding. But it just, I completely agree with what you're saying, because that part does make sense. What I fail to see is that it seems as if you would say that we're neglecting that subterfuge, that way of going. But have we not employed these tactics to influence South America and Central America? And I'm sure we're doing this in some of the European countries when we can, right? Is that maybe not, for instance, the military specifically doing it, and possibly the CIA? And I don't know what the deal is with how much money and how much we're diverting to that, obviously. But that's where I say, aren't we doing that stuff already? Are we just not good at it?
So we used to do a lot of this stuff.
Okay.
And we know how to do it now, but our senior policymakers and lawmakers restrain us from doing those things, and for some very good reasons too. It's not just them being prissy. So let's backtrack. So during the Cold War, in the beginning of the Cold War, the late 40s, 50s, and 60s, the CIA did a lot of this subterfuge stuff, a lot of this sneaky stuff. I mean, warfare today is getting sneakier. War during the Cold War was sneaky. And the reason it was so sneaky is because nobody wanted to see a Soviet military go against a a NATO military because that would go nuclear very fast. So what both powers did is they played around the periphery through proxy wars, through CIA, KGB, all that stuff. But then the CIA was sort of going out of control. They had a lot of power, a lot of ability, and not a lot of oversight because of the secretness. And the U.S. did some, CIA did some infamous things from like Iran and Guatemala, all that thing. So the 1970s, Congress basically neutered the CIA. And, for their sins, they said, there's things like the Senator Church Committee in 75, 76. I was looking into 25 years of abuse. And also during the 1960s riots, I mean, the agency and the FBI were doing, counterinsurgency on Americans at these civil rights riots. I mean, the abuses were massive. And two things came out of the 1970s for the CIA. One is they got neutered. they said never again. And here are some very narrow constraints. You can't go beyond the left and right limits. And the second is this general realization, which is true, that secrets and democracy are not compatible. And so that legacy lives on today. So even though if you talk to members of CIA Ground Division, or you talk to Special Operations Forces or the unit or Green Berets, people I talk to all the time, or even cyber folks, it's like, just give us the green light and we can do it. And they can do it. But nobody gives them the green light because of this background. However, we're getting to a point now in the 21st century where warfare is going into the shadows. And big battles like World War II, that doesn't happen. It hasn't happened in decades. And the best way to defend ourselves is to get back into the shadows and punch back, like we have done in the past. But here's the question. How do you do that without losing your democratic soul? And that should be the national security question right now in the United States of America, not how many F-35s are needed or how to get out of Afghanistan. It's like, war is getting sneakier. We can do this, but how do we do it without losing our democratic soul?
I mean, that is a very difficult question. I don't know if you have the answer to that either, because it seems, go ahead. Did you have something you wanted to add to
No, this is a question that one person doesn't have the answer to. It needs to be a national discourse, both in in parts of Europe and North America. And part of my book was to sort of set up, this is the problem. This is the threat. It's not, again, how many F-35s, how many aircraft carriers, or how many nuclear missiles. It's how do we have the ability to punch back hard. We just choose not to do it. And there's some good reason for it. And there's some good reasons to do it. We just need to, as everybody needs to think more about this. This shouldn't be the purview of a couple experts in DC or, not a smoky back room situation. This needs to be front and center.
Sure. And so one of the things that you mentioned that China has employed in doing this, rather than just try and nuke us, for instance, is you mentioned, and I ran across another source for this, which is essentially that China has more or less bought Hollywood in a way to not have Hollywood portray China as a national state power, or to make Hollywood. It's illegal, let's just pretend, in quotation marks, right, to make China the bad guys. Would this be something that we would then look to employ back against, like towards Russia, making us the heroes? Or is that how useful is this, play?
Yeah, it's a great. So one thing that Russia and China do, the way that sort of, in some ways, we're already at war with them, but don't know it by their design. And the way they do it, and we'll get to Hollywood, the way they do it is they wage war but disguise it as peace. So it doesn't look like, remember, we have a World War II mentality. If it doesn't look like World War II, it's not war, and we don't respond to it. So what they do, Russia weaponizes its Russian organized crime around the world. They use mercenaries in Middle East and Africa because we don't take them seriously. China does things, they use Belt Road Initiative. This is an economic program in Asia and Africa, and it's like this economic, like they want to invest in your economy, but it's actually like Tony Soprano or Don Corleone. It's like the mafia model where they get you addicted on a loan, and then when you can't pay back the predatory loan, they take a city like they did in Sri Lanka. They took Sri Lanka's prize port. Like it was like their Rotterdam, or their Los Angeles. And that's what Belt Road Initiative is. It's debt trap diplomacy. So we don't think of that as war because we are free market capitalists. China is not. And so they do things, they wage war, but they don't use traditional instruments of war, but they achieve the exact same things that war objectives achieve. So we should think about them a little bit more open-mindedly. And one of the greatest successes for China is Hollywood. So, your listeners, I mean, if I ask them, like, when was the last time they saw a Hollywood movie with China as the villain? China as the bad guy.
Don't remember a single one.
Nobody remembers, not in this millennia. Yeah. And the reason is because China bought Hollywood legally.
What does that mean?
Well, they bought like Legendary Studios is Chinese owned. It's Beijing controlled, the way Huawei is Beijing controlled. And also they have great market power. So the Chinese market for film is the second biggest market in the world after North America. And that means that if you're Sony Pictures or something, you want your movie to be shown in China, which you have to let the Beijing censors edit it, which they do, and often very heavily. And if you have China as a bad guy, forget it. They kibosh it in the green room floor. And as a result, China is always the good guy. So like the movie The Martian, Chinese, NASA saves the day. And there's other movies like, Top Gun 2, Mulan, and there's a lot of movies out there. And then there's other movies where they have America as the bad guy, and people cheer. And they make, one made $800 million. It didn't get shown in the United States. So it's like George Clooney money. And so, okay, and you're thinking like, okay, fine, but how is that war? And the answer is this, is that victory is no longer just battlefield victory. There's many ways to win, and that's one of the rules in the new rules of war. There's many ways to win wars. One way to win a war is that all of our grandkids speak Mandarin as a second language and are sympathetic to Beijing values. And that's kind of what the Allies did to Germany after World War II. So when the Berlin Wall fell down, West Germans all spoke English. They're all sympathetic to American culture, democracy, capitalism. Their Nazi ancestors would be horrified. But that is a way of durable victory. China gets it. The United States does not.
That's so fascinating that is like that, because we do have a hard time. Was it George W. Bush that so now infamously declared us victory after such amount of time, right? And
right, weeks.
Just weeks of that. Was that Afghanistan or was that Iraq?
That was Iraq in 2003. Iraq. Yeah, we defeated the Iraq military in a few weeks, and he was like, victory, and remember it was Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense that day, who said that Iraq and Afghanistan would just take a few weeks. It would never even go to months. So that's a strategic IQ problem.
Sure. But my question then goes to, as someone who wants to be and aspires to be a critical thinker, was it? Yeah. Or did they not understand that this was going to be did they have? Because in order to truly understand strategy, we need to understand the goals. And are the goals of the people in power necessarily the same as for the people that are there on the ground in Afghanistan? I'm not saying necessarily that the U.S. wants chaos in Afghanistan. I don't know that is beneficial. But when we say it's only going to take a couple of weeks for us to take care of this problem, and we're just going to wash our hands, and then right after, they're all going to have democracy and capitalism, and they're all going to go to McDonald's, and it's all going to be great, right?
Yes, that was the strategy.
Okay, yeah,
that was the strategy.
It makes me wonder though if that's what we're not told or sold as the strategy. And then obviously the idea is possibly we're going to be here to do what we need to do for as long as we need to do that. And now there can be a secondary strategy, which would look like what we've got going on here in Afghanistan. I'd love to get your take on what needs to happen now, because now that this pullout is happening, and I guess it's official here, and just by tomorrow or something like this, right? What next? Because we can't come back, right? I mean, we're not going to have this. All right, well, listen, I guess we just have to go back and put some peace and order into this and keep the Taliban down. And now they're fighting with ISIS. And so, what does Afghanistan, as from what you've seen and based on these 20 years that have gone by? Not only, obviously, I know you're going to say that our strategy was wrong, and that's where we started off being wrong. But seeing all this unfold is fascinating, because it's almost as if we did nothing but improve the literacy rate a little bit, help some women's rights a little. I know there's plenty of other things, obviously, that may not be able to be reported, and there's always some good and some bad that goes unreported. But based on your take on it and where it's at now, what do we do next, and what really went wrong?
Well, what really went wrong was, again, lack of strategic IQ. We thought 20 years ago, not we, the Bush administration thought this would be a quick and easy war, and that our overwhelming military might would shock and awe our enemies into submission. That was the phrase, shock and awe. And they assume that, whether it's going into Afghanistan or going into Iraq, we had all this big bombing show over Baghdad, and we thought that would subdue Saddam Hussein. It didn't. And the reason is that we had a lot of immaculate assumptions. We made a lot of bad assumptions because the people at the top were strategically illiterate. They would not say that. They didn't think that. But especially Rumsfeld coming out of the Vietnam War. I mean, he didn't serve, but he was there. He was around. Dick Cheney the same way. I mean, they all should have known better. But in some ways, national security, the way you become a big political national security guy in Washington D.C. or gal, it's not what you've done or your expertise. It's who you know. I mean, they kind of say that Washington, D.C. is like Hollywood for ugly people, because, it's all about personality. It's all about presence. It's not about meritocracy. And it's all about these nebulous things like freedom and liberty. And doesn't mean that you're a good strategist, even though that's your job. And now that's being questioned today amongst President Biden's, Jake Sullivan, this new national security advisor. He's in his early 40s. He's never done anything really strategic in his life other than being Hillary Clinton's aide de camp. Is he qualified for that job? Many people, when he got that job, said he's not. And now this past summer, it seems, evidence seems to be there. So there's a lot of problems. Now, what happens next in Afghanistan? It kind of reminds me of what happened after the Soviets left Afghanistan. So they were there for 10 years. We were there for 20. They were there from 79 to 89. Women had better rights. There was improved literacy. There was better education. They improved the infrastructure. They did a lot of things that we did. We don't give them credit for that, but they did those things. And then shortly thereafter, it all went to hell in a handbasket. And that's going to happen again. The Taliban can't even control Kabul, as we've seen by this new ISIS attack. And they're saying nice things now, but nobody expects them to have inclusion. I mean, and I think it's they're just going to turn inwards. The only thing the Taliban is not a monolithic whole. It's just a group of warlords and idealists and others united by one common enemy, the West. Once we leave, they're going to start fighting each other. It's going to go back to normal. So we've spent all this money and this time and blood in Afghanistan, and it's not gonna make a dent. We're going back to 9/10 essentially, not 9/11.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I wanna switch gears because I have a couple other specific questions on. We spoke off air about some Russian oligarchs that were using private mercenaries and private military contractors, possibly, I guess we should say, to defend things that they owned, or possibly, their property, or let's say, or their interests. So could you break down even more specifically what it would look like, just so you can, just as an example, like I'm a wealthy Russian oligarch, and I want to defend some property I have in East Africa. How did they just pick up the phone? How does this happen? Do they need to get the okay from Putin? Are they operating outside of his thing? What happens when there's a conflict? And how much autonomy does someone truly have over a group of mercenaries? Can I march them on New York? Would these guys listen to me if I said, hey, I really want my Apple iPhone back and it's somewhere? That's what I'm really trying to get at.
Well, so yeah, I mean, so look, mercenaries are coming back. I mean, it's the second oldest profession, and they were gone for like 150 years or underground. Now they're coming back, and the answer is yeah, you could do that. It might be hard to do, but you can find mercenaries who are willing to do that. I don't think they get very far. So the first thing is there's no real difference between a private military contractor and a mercenary. If you can do one, you can do the other. There's no bright line difference. The United States called Blackwater private military contractors. The world saw them as mercenaries. Russia calls the Wagner Group private military contractors. The world sees them as mercenaries. If you're a trigger puller or training other trigger pullers in a foreign war for profit, you're a mercenary. That's basically it, right? And there's also private CIAs out there too. It's a much smaller world, and we're starting to see them integrate with mercenaries.
Sorry, did you say private CIAs?
Yeah, private CIAs.
What is so private central intelligence agencies?
Yeah. So the way they work is they're usually it's another industry I used to work in. I worked in both industries for a little while, and they're like ex CIA operatives, ex MI6 or whatever. And they run human networks, and they collect publicly, like they call OSINT, open source information. They scrape the dark web for info, and they're really good at this. And they work almost exclusively for private interests. They don't like to work with governments because they work in the gray area of international law. And the last thing they want to do is have, you're not going to attract an oligarch or a Fortune 500 company if you're also working for United States of America, for London, and say they do these shady paramilitary human network things. And yeah, you're seeing more and more, like Carlos Ghosn in Japan. That's what happened to him. I mean, he was the ex-CIA. He was the former CEO and president of Nissan, and he was arrested in Japan for corruption. And he hired American Green Beret mercenaries who did basically a CIA op to extract him, or they call exfiltrate him, under the noses of Japanese national police, which are no kidding, and fly him secretly from Japan to Beirut, where he's at today. And Beirut, where he also is a citizen, has no extradition treaty with Japan. And that was done because he's a super rich individual. And what you need to have contacts in that world. And sometimes lawyers have those contacts, and others. So when I was in the industry, we got a lot of business through just networking, and reputation. Reputation is the actual currency. It's not really money, because reputation is all you have, because it's an illicit economy. So yeah, you could, an oligarch or a super, Jeff Bezos or so they could all do this, and they all have international interests abroad, and they are tired of working in partnership with what they consider to be corrupt host nations. So yeah, now they know Exxon someday can rent its own army. That's the world that we're getting to.
That is okay. Before I even just throw my piece out on it, what are we talking? Because I'm sure people are probably interested in 100 million, 500 million. Does he have to give up $1 billion to go get rescued from the green race? What does people? I'd be curious.
It's hard to say.
Of course,
we don't really know. I mean, there's no. there's no
No menu.
Bureau of Statistics for mercenaries and private intel, right?
Of course. Yeah.
And this is one of the problems historically of this type of industry is contract enforcement, because if you get ripped off, you can't sue, right? So whether it's the Middle Ages where popes used to hire mercenary armies, there's always treachery between masters and mercenaries. So we don't know for sure. I would say, maybe $2 million is my guess. Yeah, exactly. That's it. And versus 20 years in a Japanese jail. So I think that's I think when these operations succeed, or when the mercenaries kill the president of Haiti, there's a lot of people around the world who are like, I wonder if I could do that. And so their success, the lack of accountability, that is quietly encouraging this behavior and this market for force.
Okay, and I see it. Yeah, that makes a bit more sense now. Especially considering that reputation would be important, because no oligarch is going to trust that or to give out. And obviously, having that sort of money, they can clearly they could do a test run if they wanted. They could pay you $5 million and just say, "Go do this." If you don't do it, then they know I'm not going to trust you to get me out of prison.
Exactly.
So I see the motive there for them to also not work with the nation states, and that it could be lucrative. It's just amazing to me to have that realization that your nation state is not in control of everything. That's what they kind of push that view, but it doesn't seem to be the case that even they can function without the mercenaries.
Right. So we're actually getting to a world by like mid-century, mid 21st century, is that the super rich can become superpowers. If you can swipe a check, you can now wage war for any reason you want, no matter how petty, or stop one. And we're going to get to a point, I think, where states, we grew up thinking, like in 6th grade, that states are the geopolitical unit of international affairs. And that was true 50 years ago, but it's not true 50 years from now. We may get to a point where the Fortune 500, the super rich, anybody who could afford it can now wage wars, and that states, rather than driving war, can become booty of war, prizes of war. And we already see this in Latin America, right? We have narco states that are captured by narco gangs like Guatemala, Salvador. And that could, we see this in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, especially like the Central African Republic region, South Asia, that Afghanistan will turn into that. And what I call this durable disorder, this is a new type of international relations where the world will not be state-centric. You'll still have strong states in Europe and North America and parts of East Asia, but most of the world will not be controlled by states. Those will be states in name only, or there'll be regimes inside of a state. There'll be other types of governance on the ground. Some of it will be local, like warlords. Some of it will be like, corporate, all sorts of weird things. And that will change international relations as we know it. But right now, places like Washington, D.C., and London and Geneva and New York are still state-centric. And that is part, whether it's warfare or economics or anything else, it's state centricity. And that is not the world we're walking into.
So it's going to be a curious thing, though, to see Apple fight Samsung for some minerals over in
sure.
wherever. But
that's right.
Yeah, but I mean, if it does go the way that you're saying, I see no reason for something like that to happen. I mean, I was going to ask, is there any? I mean, like you said, it's hard to know what's truly happening. But are there any cases of this going the wrong way for rich really wealthy individuals who attempt to, say, take over an oil field from Shell because the Shell they tried to do something, and like you said, they can be petty. And I can imagine some of them, not all, obviously, just being like, you know what, screw you, I'm just going to take your shit. And
that's right.
Does that blow up in their face, or? Oh
yeah, I mean, we see this happen with Wagner Group. They the oligarch in Russia, Prigozhin, who owns the Wagner Group, who also owns the troll factory, the cyber troll factory. Same guy. He also owns an oil gas company, and he struck a deal with the government of Syria that, with the Kremlin's permission, that, hey, there was like ISIS in these oil gas fields. If you can clear them out, the oil is yours, 50-50 or something like that. And that's, how contracts get cut. Sometimes clients go and masters, they go into business with each other. And so they sent the Wagner group out, 318 mercenaries from the Russian-speaking world, and they met American Delta Force, Green Berets, and Kurdish militia, and it was a huge battle. And the Americans won and decimated the Wagner group. So that's an example. We had a year and a half ago that we call the Bay of Piglets. We had some former Green Beret mercenaries go down to Venezuela to have a coup d'etat, but they were completely, their organization was very amateurish and was completely infiltrated by the Venezuelan intelligence services. So when they showed up, the Venezuelan intelligence just rolled them up on shore. Look, there's all sorts of things. So I spent a year going through the archives of northern Italy, which is great field work, by the way, because that's where a lot of mercenary wars were fought in the European Middle Ages, in southern France and northern Italy. And there's all sorts of treachery and treason of mercenaries ripping off masters and masters ripping off mercenaries. And I talk about it in my book, The New Rules of War, because there's our 4-stars are incapable of thinking about warfare this way. But it's like, warfare becomes a souk now, where you use market strategies to outbid your enemy's mercenaries, bribe them. You can do all sorts of nasty things. You could send mercenaries into your neighbor's backyard who you don't like, and then cut them free and not pay them, and they will ravage your neighbor's yard for food, devastating your neighbor. I mean, there's all sorts of things that can happen, and so. The answer is yes. Things go sideways very quickly. And also, look, out-of-work mercenaries start wars for profit. They elongate wars for profit. I mean, when you start linking killing with profit motive, it gets really ugly very quickly. But again, nobody's thinking about this in the halls of power. They think of mercenaries as cartoonish Hollywood villains, and that's not the case.
Okay. And so then on the flip side, I think you mentioned, and obviously having my connection to Nigeria, that they were successfully employed to take out Boko Haram. Was that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
And, just as a preface to that, was that? I guess you'll answer this as to who employed them, and then does the Nigerian military, from what you know, I thought they're fairly powerful, right? So why couldn't they just squeeze us out or take care of it? Or,
it's a great question. So I just by way of background, I spent a lot of time as I'll say private military contractor, working in West Africa, several years. Because mercenaries go where the conflict is. Those are called market opportunities. Sadly, very sadly. Dark humored, excuse me.
I get it.
So the Nigerian military is like the superpower of the region in the military of West Africa. They have a no kidding military. It's a big country with a huge economy. It's very sophisticated. But for 6 years, the Nigerian military could not successfully deal with Boko Haram, this Islamic extremist terrorist organization, kidnapped, school children routinely. It's awful. And they're like in northern and eastern Nigeria. And the Nigerian military, they, brutally even tried to subdue it. They couldn't do it. So in 2015, President Goodluck Jonathan, who was then the president of Nigeria, his administration secretly hired mercenaries. Most of them came from Executive Outcomes Alumni Network. For those who are African, there was in the 1990s this really no kidding corporate mercenary outfit out of South Africa called Executive Outcomes. It was like its own private military. Nothing's come close. They are super lethal, super effective, super good, not morally good, but good. They got the job done. But they disbanded in 1998 for several reasons. But they have like alumni, if you will, in Africa. And I was tapped into that network. And they tapped, Goodluck Jonathan, somebody in his administration tapped into that network and said, we need somebody to remove Boko Haram with us, with our military. And they also pulled in Russian-speaking mercenaries. And they did what the Nigerian military couldn't do in 6 years. These mercenaries with the Nigerian military did in 6 weeks. They pushed Boko Haram out. They showed up with like Mi-24 Hind helicopters. These are like flying tanks, Russian-made flying tanks. But one of the reasons they were successful is because also one of the biggest reasons people like to hire mercenaries, whether it's Russia or Nigeria or oligarchs, is because they give you good plausible deniability. Remember, warfare is getting sneakier. Weapons that give you plausible deniability are more important than just raw firepower. And mercenaries give you really good plausible deniability, because even if you capture them and they speak English or they speak Russian, you don't know for a fact who they're really working for. And they may not know who they're working for either. So, and also, you can have the mercenaries commit human rights violations that you don't want your military caught doing. Because everybody has an iPhone these days. Nigerian military could wipe out a village, but if that goes to YouTube, that's really bad politics. But if mercenaries do it, the Nigerian say, well, we didn't know them. They're some random people. Even though most people would see right through that, there's enough insulation so the international community won't act. So mercenaries are attractive for people who want to wage war and either can't, like corporations, or who can but don't really want to bloody their hands.
Yeah, because I do remember when the Haitian president was assassinated, that I believe they caught quite a few of the mercenaries who had come from Colombia, possibly. And
Colombians.
So was it all Colombians or?
Mostly Colombians.
Mostly Colombians, yeah. I remember a quote they had from one of the mercenaries essentially saying that they thought they were brought, whether he was telling the truth or not, that he thought he was brought there to protect somebody. And then it got me thinking a little bit further on what could have possibly happened, where you could even have a mercenary group. You could send a group, a whole bunch of guys in there to protect, and only need 2 or 3 of them to be aware that the real mission is to assassinate the president or to do whatever the mission, and there's plausible deniability amongst even the people who are there. I mean, if someone starts shooting at them, they're just going to start shooting back, and so I find it fascinating to think that that's the way it got done, and to think that at the time that I was reading the article, that it was just they were trying to say that it was orchestrated by someone who was potentially wanting to run for president.
Right, that's right.
It's just like. It's crazy.
And people see this, they see it was successful, and they're like, well, we'll see more of that. But yeah, they're Colombians. And so in the mercenary world, the private military world, private CIA, you have multiple shells in between the end user and between both ends. And so they don't, and that's that's the risk, and that's what you're getting paid for. You don't know who's who's hiring you for what reason. And look, I mean, we have American ex-Navy SEALs and Green Berets who are fighting in Yemen. There's not much accountability, for mercenaries. So we're going to see them growing. I mean, those who say that, if we just have more international law, that'll take care of the problem, that's not going to take care of the problem. I mean, look at Libya. Libya is a mercenary on mercenary fight. We have Russian mercenaries, Turkish mercenaries, UAE mercenaries. You have Middle East oligarchies there, or kingdoms, whatever. We don't know who's actually on the ground, and it's a secretive war, like all the other ones. Who's going to go in and arrest all those mercenaries? United Nations? No, they're not. And also, mercenaries can shoot your law enforcement dead. I mean, it's the one conflict. You cannot commodify conflict because you can't regulate it. So this idea that international law can fix it is delusional. So what that means is, in the future, this trend of mercenaries, which has been steadily growing for 30 years, is now going to start to arc up. And because the U.S. used them so heavily in Iraq and Afghanistan, they're kind of quasi-legitimized.
Do you see, and maybe you do or don't know a whole lot about this, but I find it interesting considering where we're going with cryptocurrency and the entire DeFi position. Could we get to a point where someone, obviously it's not entirely anonymous as we now know, but there's a good layer of insulation, as you put it, that you could possibly raise. Could we just have? Are we looking at that also as part of a thing? Down 50 years, where I just have some Bitcoin and here you go. And I mean, it could already be happening as compensation, obviously, but I could see. Yeah, I could see that as being a good way to employ. I mean, the Silk Road. We all know the story that went on with that, but I can see something that would actually function. That it could function because I see the motive for the mercenary and to do a job and do a job well and to get compensated handsomely for it. And I can see a market of people who would clearly just want to just put some Bitcoin here, just press a little button, and this is the objective, and maybe a contract almost even like that, and you're done. I mean, if it can be employed, I'm just so amazed that these mercenary groups have the ability to get. Where do they get the weapons from? And where do they get these helicopters? How they must have some connection to some government. And there's some blend. There's some blend there that's probably very murky because it can't get a tank, right?
Yeah. No, so you're right. So look, I mean, cryptocurrency is the currency of choice for illicit economies. Whether you're terrorists or
is it not cash
mercenaries.
though? I've heard that stated, but I thought that cash would still be
cash. Here's the problem with cash: is you have to move it, right?
Sure.
So you have Ukrainian oligarchs who'd fly to Cyprus on their G5s and offload duffel bags of cash into Cyprus banks, and that's been closed up now. But cryptocurrency is much easier to move. That's why diamonds were a big thing in the 1990s, blood diamonds, because they're very small, they're worth a lot, they're hard, you can't really trace them. Cryptocurrency, you can move vast sums of money quickly, and nobody can really trace it well. I mean, the NSA, the U.S. national, they're finding ways to get around it, but cryptocurrency is ideal for good guys, but also ideal for bad guys. And it's become the currency of choice. So you're seeing that. Of course, the cryptocurrency market is very volatile, and there's a lot of other problems with it. And I'm sure your viewers know that. But the thing is that in Africa, it's not hard to get weapons in sub-Saharan Africa. So those Mi-24s were probably the same ones that Executive Outcome used in Sierra Leone in 1997, 1998, or the mid-1990s. After countries like Libya fell in 2011, Libya had a lot of arms in its arsenal. They all evaporated. We don't know where they went. That's going to happen now in Afghanistan. America is leaving a lot of weapons behind, some of it very sophisticated. It's all going to be sold off by the Taliban and ISIS, or stolen, or warlords. It's all going to disappear. And we're going to start seeing it show up in weird places that we don't want to see show up. And so this world, I mean, it's like anything else. It's an illicit economy. All the illicit economies work kind of together in some ways. I mean, just like you have narcos dealing with, human trafficking, and you have now mercenaries. I mean, you're starting to see that all blend together in ways that are very disturbing.
Okay, I've two questions more if you got the time to handle it. I've spent a large portion of my career in Europe with I guess you could call it. I was in Azerbaijan for 2.5 years, which is on that border. Sure. I was in Baku, and okay. Then I also played in Morocco, which was awesome as well. But I've spent a large portion in Scandinavia and a large portion in Eastern Southern Europe, so Serbia and Croatia. The Balkan War that happened in the 90s. I mean, the U.S. Had its hand in something. I think we bombed Serbia as well. Oddly, a player on my team, when I played in Serbia, I played in Belgrade, right in the heart of the city. One of the defenders on my team, his dad was in the hospital. We had apparently been aiming for a radio telecommunications. This was the apparent objective. We either hit it and also hit a hospital that my friend's dad was also in. He survived, but that puts a lot into perspective when you are walking down the street where there was a war just 15 years before I got there. And the use of mercenaries. I'm curious. Were there any in the Balkans, if you have any knowledge of that? And two, given that that was one of the most major, if not the most major European war that's happened in the last, right, 30 years. I don't know that there anything trumps that war. What happened to those guys? Did they right after just go, well, you know what, and let's head to Iraq, or somewhere
Oh,
else?
mercenary.
What happened to those soldiers? They didn't just retire. Some of them. How did they? Did they recruit, and what happens there? And so it's a two-part question, but I guess just
Okay.
were there mercenaries involved in the Balkan conflict for the Yugoslavia, and what happened to the guys that were okay? The war's done.
Okay, so the Balkan conflict in the 1990s now seems like ancient history, but it was a very brutal war, and it was also NATO's first real challenge as a defense organization, and a lot of things went wrong in the U.S. and NATO and their own strategy. And as you all know, as the folks in the Balkans know, that the history of the Balkans is very complex and goes back centuries. It's very complex. So when Tito died, and when the Soviet wall, Berlin Wall fell down, the pressure cooker just blew out. And I can't speak for the Serbians and mercenaries there. I do know that the United States hired, like I would say, a proto mercenary company called MPRI. It's an American company that basically professionalized other militaries, and that's a form of mercenaryism. And if mercenaries do three basic things. They do direct action, which is like you kill people, or sabotage. You do like strategic surveillance. You go to the denied areas, you go inside, you walk the ground and ground truth it, and you shoot people who want to shoot you. And the third is you train and equip. And that's an essential mercenary function. So MPRI was doing that. Now, they wouldn't say they're mercenary, but that's what they are. And then after the war, here's the thing about the mercenary world, at least in the West, is it's sort of like Wall Street. They got bought by another company called L3. L3 did like like communications, and like they're like Verizon, and they bought this company, and MPRI, they made a lot of money in the beginning of the Iraq War. And there's mergers and acquisitions in this world. It's really strange. So those guys found work in Iraq. The Americans, they started working in Iraq. Now, Serbians and others, they're probably now working in like the Wagner Group. I mean, the thing about the Balkans is that, let's talk about the mercenary world just very briefly. So here's the way the mercenary world is set up. It's all illicit. And you have to be inside the world or know people to understand this. It's set up according to language group. And there are three major language groups. There's English speakers, Russian speakers, and Spanish speakers. And those are called command languages. And those, like the English speakers, are all sort of NATO culture. They fight a certain way. The Russians fight a certain way. The Latin Americans fight a certain way. There's some smaller groups like French and Hebrew, but those are the three big ones. And the Russian speakers are not like the Wagner groups works right now for Russia, and the people all speak Russian, but they come from Azerbaijan, they come from Serbia, they come from that former Soviet world. They are very good mercenaries in terms of effectiveness. The English speakers are good, but they're expensive because you're buying like X seals. The Russians are cheaper, but they're very good. And then the Latin Americans are the cheapest, but they're very good too. You know who's not good? Are Chinese.
Really? Chinese mercenaries?
Yeah. I mean, they're terrible. I mean, first of all, nobody speaks Chinese except for Chinese, so they can't link up with anybody. Second of all, there's a lot of like saber rattling out of China now about their military, but they're an unproven force. I mean, the last time they went to war, they went to war briefly against India, but last time they went to war was against the Vietnamese, after the Vietnamese kicked out the French, kicked out the Americans, and took care of the Khmer Rouge. And then the Chinese invaded them, and they kicked the Chinese ass. The last time they decisively won a big war was 1948 or 49, excuse me. So, like, that's why, even though there's a lot, there's some other reasons you don't see a lot of Chinese mercenaries, but the militaries that have the most combat experience with good training, like Serbians, for example, or Balkans, they are in demand, and you're seeing them now in the Middle East. You're seeing them in Libya. You're seeing them all over the place.
Wow. That's crazy cool. Yeah, I'd been dying to ask that question because I knew that there's probably it's highly unlikely that when wars there's always fallout from a war, right? And
Yes.
I would expect that soldiers in men knowing that this is what I do and what I do well, and many of them I'm sure enjoy the life, and you hear and when you speak to guys that have seen action in battle, and they're obviously at times disgusted or annoyed at things that they had to do or that they'd seen, but they also say, "I felt most alive. I was most into." So it's clear to me that that's something that they would want to pursue for a long period of time if they could do so. My last question is one that I pose to everyone, which is considering such hard study and such hard thought on your part to know what would be the best strategy for a nation. How has this helped you in your own life? How does this change the way you choose, what to do, what's best for you? Because I mean, with all the books behind you, I can only imagine what you're reading. If you have any great book ideas for people to try and delve into this stuff, I would love to hear. I mean, we can just talk briefly to get a list. But if
Sure.
you're speaking to a bunch of young guys and girls that are trying to say, well, cool, maybe I should learn, how to navigate through life. Life is a bit different and difficult, and I've got a lot going on. How have you come up with some stuff?
Yeah, I mean, look, my journey from being a violinist in New York City a long time ago as a child to where I am now is totally unexpected, and I was like a pinball in a machine. I wish I could say like, oh, it was all meant to be, and arrogant people say that, but for me, it was like one catastrophe from the other. Everything I planned to do burned in flames, and opportunities I was open to kind of worked out well. So I think the first lesson, I was obstinate when I was a young man. I was like stubborn, but I would tell myself just to chill, take the hand off the steering wheel a little bit, and things, it sounds cliche-ish, but things can work out and you can find a place. Have some humility. And the second is that I used to think when I was a paratrooper, I was very America, gung ho, and I think like our American strategists think now is like if we just overpower our enemy, like there's no problem that force alone cannot ultimately solve, right? And I've learned when I became a private military contractor, mostly in Africa, how wrong that was. The most effective weapon or tool or instrument we have is the 6 inches between our ears, and that cunning can, you can be David versus Goliath, and that's what the U.S. has been Goliath for 75 years. And whether it's warfare or whether you're in a team sport or if you're doing politics or even in a relationship or anything, there's all sorts of ways to be a critical thinking person, to be a critical and creative thinker. And the theorist in my world that I like the most is Sun Tzu in his book The Art of War. Sun Tzu is 2,500 years old. He's an ancient Chinese general. His book, The Art of War, it's easy to read but hard to digest. It's sort of like chess. It's easy to learn but hard to master. And there are many translations of it because it's ancient, almost poetry, where every kanji has like multiple meanings. So there's a couple translations you can get, and I should probably list them, but there just start with one, and it's about how you think. And also in the back of my book, The New Rules of War, I have something called the 36 stratagems of ancient China. Ancient China has another like lost Sun Tzu who has these 36 strategies about how to use deception and knowledge. Some of it's quite devious and cunning. I wouldn't recommend it for personal relationships, but for life, it could be very helpful. That Chinese business uses, that Chinese foreign affairs uses, but those in the West have never heard of this. And if you read these they're like simple one-liners, these 36 stratagems. It's actually kind of useful if you have a big problem about how you go about persuading somebody or getting this or doing whatever you want. And again, it comes down to being a critical thinker, being open to opportunities, and being cunning. But cunning doesn't always have to be devious. It just means, be smart, not, work smart, not hard.
Yeah, and being well-rounded. I think that's that part. Just to take a second to think, because you're so dead on with the mentality that we have from the West. That whole USA, we can crush and we can do that, and it's a product of having some success. And I think it's definitely in everybody's favor, though, to realize that if you can see the other side and to see how they were thinking, because if you're on the top all the time, though, there's people obviously always trying to figure out what they can do to climb on top of you, and they get very creative. I mean, you can get quite lazy at the top, and you get very creative at the bottom, and that tends to be the case regardless of in anywhere, in sports and in business. So I find it fascinating, just the subject as a whole. So anyway, we will put all of your. You've written 2 books. Did I read the?
I've written 2 nonfiction and 3 fiction.
Okay.
3
you've written 3 fiction. So I haven't tapped into those because I'm not finished yet. So I haven't done a real deep dive into everything that you've read. But I will definitely finish the book. We will list all this stuff. We will link out. Is there any place where guys can go to hear more about you if they're interested more?
Well, first of all, I recommend of the fiction, my last book is called, the third one, it's called High Treason. It's a lot of fun. It's like an international thriller. My last nonfiction book, The New Rules of War, is it's nonfiction, but it's also written to be read. It's not written for academics or experts. It's written for everybody. You can find out more about me on my website, www.seanmcfate.com. It's Sean, SEAN, McFate, MCFATE.com. And let me just say this. I'll close out by saying this, is that right now the West has a low strategic IQ problem. But I kind of believe that not everybody can be a good strategist, but good strategists can come from anywhere. It's not linked to if you're wearing a uniform or if you've been, in the military for 40 years. We want creative thinkers and critical thinkers. And sometimes I think too many years in an institution lobotomizes people. So I think what I'm trying to start here is this like intellectual insurgency for good strategy for the world. And it can come from, good ideas can come from anywhere. And I want people to take that seriously as you look around international relations, politics, etc.
Awesome. I love it. This was a very much a treat for me. I hope you guys listening have learned quite a bit, which I know you will have. If you want to check out more, just go ahead and go to the show notes. If you're just listening to this, it'll be all right there. We'll link to all of Sean's stuff. And if you're on YouTube, go right down below and check all that stuff in the description box. Sean, it was awesome. We will definitely have to do this again sometime.
That would be my pleasure, Will. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. Guys, we'll see you later.
Yeah.